If you've been following me for a while now, you'll know that the only thing that makes me angry faster than disrespecting Tolkien's lore is the bumblewit, asinine, deplorable arguments I hear being thrown around by muckweeds and shills that are being paid by Amazon to ingest the garbage Rings of Power series and pretend it didn't give them severe brain damage. It seems every single time that I log into any type of social media, there's some bogus-filled idiot spouting about how legendary and thoughtful the writing of the Rings of Power is, and that anyone who criticizes the decisions made is just a blundering racist idiot. Isn't that funny in and of itself? That every single person that doesn't like a piece of media is actually just the most discriminatory, chauvinistic pig that has no taste for good cinema? Somehow that's more believable than a product being so mind-numbingly dumb that the general public sees it for what it is? Really? So every single dislike on every single YouTube video, and every single low score on Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, and every other review website, and every single one of the hundreds and hundreds of YouTube videos that have been made and posted about it, are all part of some giant conspiracy to troll the Rings of Power out of existence as one cohesive unit?
Wow.
If that's the truth, then I think we're giving Hitler a run for his money when it comes to brainwashing an entire country into believing a completely false and trumped-up narrative. If you've got the brain power of a hysterically high hedgehog, then you probably noticed the fact that the Rings of Power is objectively horrible, and that those who hate it are completely normal and mentally sound individuals. Mostly. And that the dozens of people that try to defend it are obviously bought and paid for by the billion-dollar corporation that can't tolerate any criticism of any of its creative decisions. But what is sadder than that is the arguments that they lob off to the public to actually defend this garbage.
And that's where I come in.
I think it's about time that we tear these people a new one and show just how weak their logic actually is. Spoiler alert, all of these arguments fall flat on their face as soon as you think about them for longer than 30 seconds.
Amazon didn't have the rights to the Second Age.
This is the one argument that probably has more credibility than most of the others, but considering most of the other arguments have zero credibility, 0 times 0 is still 0. This is by far the argument that I hear the most people spewing whenever I bring up breaks against the lore. They didn't have all the rights anyway, so of course the show is gonna be bad. The showrunners, on numerous occasions, have stated blatantly that they made the show that they wanted to make. That Amazon gave them full creative power, and that this is the mildewed buttermilk sausage that they came up with.
We didn't want to do like a side thing we wanted to find a huge Tolkienian mega epic. Amazon were wonderfully crazy enough to say, yes, let's do that.
And the guys like No BS, they have let us make the show we want to make.
Bad idea.
A show that is nothing but vaguely connected to the lore. I know that statement offends you, but sorry not sorry, it's the truth. That $250 million purchase back in 2017 got them the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, including The Hobbit and the appendices. They also stated that they would be able to create a narrative based off of anything mentioned about the First and Second Age in the original trilogy, as long as they didn't make any blatant contradictions to the lore. But guess what? Not only was Tom Shippey, the world-renowned Tolkien expert, fired early on from the show, he was fired because he called them out on their bullshit. They were polluting the lore, aka making contradictions, my friends. Doing stuff that they shouldn't have to the lore, and as a result, they kicked him to the curb. This gave them the complete freedom to make whatever drunked-up story they wanted. This argument also falls flat on its face when you consider that they put stuff in the lore that they clearly don't have the rights to. So even if the rights they did buy were limiting them, they clearly still picked and chose whatever they wanted out of the Second Age to use, rights or no rights. There is literally one mention of Miriel in all of the Lord of the Rings and appendices, and it is to provide context that she was in line for the throne of Numenor, and that the throne was usurped from her by Pharazôn, and yet they blatantly are contradicting that by just making her the Queen of Numenor. This is a glaring contradiction that should have not gotten past an entire studio and panel of producers that were supposedly wary of not rebutting any of the lore that they bought, when literally the only mention of her is in the same breath of the exact opposite of what they are rendering in their show, unless they had no intent on actually following the lore in the first place. Another example is the fact that they have hinted the name Anatar in several interviews, the name that Sauron gives himself when he is trying to win over the elves, a name that is not mentioned even once in all of the books and the appendices. Clearly, they are not letting the lore limit what they make their stories about. Otherwise, none of these outright contradictions to the lore would exist, like the absolute skewed and crammed timeline, the disregard for Durin's mythology, the origin of Mordor, the events and situations that Galadriel was a part of, the role that Elrond played in the Second Age, Gandalf not coming to Middle-earth until the Third Age, the order in which the Rings of Power were made, and on and on and on. All of this lore was laid out perfectly and should have been easy to adapt, and yet they went the route of making as many contradictions as possible. How did this happen? If you want a full breakdown of all the lore contradictions in Rings of Power, check out my previous video or just stay tuned on the channel because I will probably talk about it again in the future. The point is that the show we got is the show that the writers would have come up with regardless of if they had the rights to all of Tolkien's work or none of them. Rings of Power is a full realization of the mental brain power of every writer in Amazon, and it is not a lot. So stop saying that the only thing that held the writers back was the rights to the lore. That's never been an excuse for a bad adaptation. Hollywood had full creative rights to both Aragon and the Percy Jackson books, and look how shit those films were. It's the exact same situation here. Idiots thinking that they can tell a better story than the literal author of the story. And in this case, the literal father of fantasy. Truly, truly idiots.
Idiots doing idiot things because they're idiots.
Tolkien's work needed to be updated for a modern audience.
Tell me that you hate Tolkien's work but want to use his world to boost your own views and ideas, without telling me you hate Tolkien's work but want to use his world to boost your own views and ideas. People that love a work for what it is don't want to tear it apart and make it more digestible, or in this case, more modern, in order for people to enjoy it. If you really had a love for Tolkien's work, you wouldn't want to change every single asset of his writing on a fundamental level. You either like it or you don't.
I'm just saying it's not rocket science.
Quit putting on this fake facade of appreciation for the lore when you clearly hate it. Tolkien's ideas don't need to be updated when the ideas themselves are timeless. I know it absolutely explodes your tiny little brain to know that a straight, white Christian male had really good ideas that don't need to be changed, but that is the cold hard truth, you dunce. What are the messages that Tolkien's story brought that need to be changed? Please tell me. Never give up no matter how hard the journey is. Good will always triumph over evil. The circumstances that we find ourselves in are not what determine our destiny. Our actions are what determine our destiny, whether it is good or evil. There's no greater love than the love a man has when he lays down his life for his friends. None of these messages are messages that will ever go out of style, you morons. You just wanted an excuse for pushing your messages to a bought and paid for fan base. It's completely bonkers to me that you think you are capable of writing better stories than J.R.R. bloody Tolkien.
No, you are so dumb. You are really dumb. For real.
These are the messages that you're pushing out, you troglodytes. Reaching your goals is the most important thing, even if you have to slander, manipulate, insult, and deprave those below you. Everyone is just simply a means to an end. Never forget the past, never forget what people's ancestors did, and always hold a grudge against them. Belittling and insulting is the way that you make friends and get others to do what you want. Bravery and selflessness aren't what make you a king. Having a shiny pendant is what makes you a king. Volcanoes aren't even lethal. You can totally stand in one and be totally fine. In fact, you should try it sometime. You guys should definitely be sued for that one. Riding horses is really fun, but please don't film any of it in slow motion or else you'll create the stuff of nightmares. What the fuck? Happy with yourselves? Happy that you taught an entire new generation of upcoming Tolkien lovers the exact opposite of what his stories are all about? I'll bet you are. It seems you guys are obsessed with giving yourselves massive pats on the back for every single retarded decision that you ever made. Saying Tolkien's writing was outdated and needs to be updated is like saying the Mona Lisa needs to be repainted, cause the oil Da Vinci used isn't as good as the new specialized paints modern artists have developed. Not only is it retarded, but it's gonna piss off everyone.
Oh, are you stupid?
And don't get me started on saying Tolkien didn't have black people in his world, because he absolutely did. This just proves how lazy you are. You're so lazy you didn't even bother to read the books before deciding you hated them for the simple reason that a straight white Christian male wrote them. Which leads directly into the next absurdly stupid argument.
You're just a racist, sexist bigot and hate diversity.
Shoot me in the freaking face. I can't believe how much Amazon has milked this clickbait, straw man, disingenuous, stupid ass argument.
You're so stupid.
From day one, it has been Amazon's poster boy to sway away any criticism that they get. It makes absolutely no blooming sense when you consider the Lord of the Rings audience. You know what Lord of the Rings is, right? You know that the Lord of the Rings is the most famous fantasy story ever told, right? You know that the books alone were translated into dozens and dozens of languages, right? Millions and millions of people from every ethnicity love Lord of the Rings. How could they be racist against themselves? It's completely illogical and is the biggest cop-out of actually ingesting any fault. If people are racist, please explain to me why the House of the Dragon is so popular. That show has even more diverse people in it than Rings of Power, and it's basically universally loved. Even by all the people that hated Game of Thrones Season 8. Rings of Power had so much more potential than the House of the Dragon did because it didn't have a show preceding it that had an absolutely abysmal final season. They should have done so much worse than you, and you know why it didn't? Because it actually had a good story, and it made the diversity in it fit together perfectly. You know another movie that did this perfectly? Dune. Dune was incredibly successful, and it had one of the most diverse casts I've ever seen, but they were smart and made the diversity make sense. People from cloudy, rainy planets have pale white skin, and people from desert, sandy, hot as hell planets have dark brown skin. Bill Nye the Science Guy. That's world building 101, dickheads. Make the ethnicity of the people in your world reflect the habitat that they live in. What Rings of Power did was literally just insert token people of color into every single culture, like the whole bloody place is a giant melting pot. It makes sense in a more high-tech world where traveling massive distances is easy, but not in a medieval gothic time period where you might die from a cold after slipping into a river. When the white men came to America, Native Americans were astonished because they had never seen white people before. They were even more astonished when they saw the only black man on Lewis and Clark's expedition named York. He was nothing like anything they'd ever seen before, and they thought that he had charcoal all over his body. That historical event takes place hundreds of years after the medieval time frame that Middle-earth is set in. The world building is now broken in Middle-earth simply because they wanted to get all of those brownie points from the intersectionalists and entitled pricks. Now none of the races are defined anymore. Anyone can be from anywhere in Middle-earth now. We can't tell a single elf apart from any human, dwarf, or hobbit for that matter. The only race that has any characteristic in this show is the orcs. They're all pale and white because guess what? They stay out of the sun. How ironic is that?
That seems awfully convenient.
Oh, so you guys do understand physics then. Then what the hell is a dwarven lady who lives underground 24/7 doing with such an insane tan? Try following that logic for me, please. The worst part is that they could have easily remedied this by just adding a little bit of background. Maybe she's part of a dwarf clan that doesn't live underground anymore. But nope, she's been in Moria her whole doggone life. And we're supposed to believe that she got this beautiful dark skin from living in a place where there's no damn sun.
That doesn't make sense.
That's dumb. The point is that inserting token ethnic people for the sole purpose of diversity doesn't make any sense, and it breaks the fourth wall and people realize they're no longer watching an epic fantasy, but just an 8-hour-long diversity hiring quota.
Boring!
It also completely simplifies the reason why people think that they were hired. Were they hired because they were actually talented, or were they hired for the sole purpose of their skin color? John Boyega came out about that after Star Wars came around and said that Star Wars had no idea what to do with him, but hired him anyway, because he was black, and for no other reason. They didn't even focus on writing a good character, they just focused on checking boxes. That's what's happening here. Don't even get me started on the people that think Tolkien didn't add any people of color to his works, because that immediately tells me that you really haven't read anything that Tolkien wrote.
Is your idiot brain getting by stupid?
Go read the books and you'll see how dead wrong you are. Tolkien knew how to world build and as a result put many different cultures and ethnicities into his world. Just because all of you are too stupid to craft a story that brings the diversity of Middle-earth to a live action in a logical and meaningful way doesn't make the people that hate your work racist. In fact, it actually makes you the racist. You're the one comparing black people to orcs, not us, dimwits. Yeah, I know you got the original cast to jump on your bandwagon to call out the fans for racism, but look at who actually took part in it. The people that have had basically the smallest amount of action since the original trilogy dropped. They'd say anything at this point if it means getting another paycheck and staying relevant. Thank heaven some of them still have a backbone. I love you, Bernard Hill. You will always be my king. I love diversity in films. Whenever it is done right, it only ever improves the storytelling and entrenches people even deeper into the world. But you guys have gone about it in the absolute wrongest way. You focused on checking a box more than actually writing good characters and meaningful stories. I can't even remember half of the people's names in this bloody show because all of them blend into one boring, bland block of wood, regardless of what race they are. And stop acting like making your show more diverse is saving lives and is the greatest thing anyone has ever done. Remember how much the makers of The Eternals were flaunting about their movie saving lives for its diversity and inclusion? Yeah, check out how well that went. It's because people don't watch movies and TV shows for that kind of stuff. They watch it for good stories and meaningful character arcs. Speaking of meaningful characters, you want to know why people don't like Galadriel? Yeah, it's not because she has the lady parts. It's because she's horribly written. She exemplifies literally every single trait that makes a person hate someone on TV. Spiteful, prideful, violent, manipulative, cocky, stupid, and altogether assholery. Yeah, I know there are those of you that say, she's gonna go through a character arc, so obviously she's gonna have some flaws. I agree, but you'd think that they'd give her even one good trait. I can't think of a single redeeming quality of Galadriel's. If her name wasn't Galadriel, there'd be nothing stopping me from thinking she's the main villain of the show. Also, how could you ever say that the Lord of the Rings fan base hates strong female characters when one of the most badass female characters is in the same franchise? Eowyn is one of my all-time favorite people in the original trilogy, and she takes down one of the biggest baddies with one of the most badass lines imaginable.
I am no man.
Yeah, we don't like strong female characters, we love them! Duh. Just write a good one for Pete's sake and we will count her among the droves of epic female characters in cinema. But until that happens, sorry, she goes into the try-too-hard disposables where she belongs. Not to mention, it was a stupid idea to cast anyone for the role of Galadriel except for Cate Blanchett. No one will ever, ever replace her.
Just be happy you got a show. It's better than nothing.
This argument is absolutely bollocks, because it's assuming that the Lord of the Rings fan base wanted more content. We don't! We aren't Star Wars fans, ready and willing to love anything and everything that Disney blurps out, regardless of quality. In fact, most of the Middle-earth fan base was completely happy with what we got, with no desire to see anything else tarnished further. The only people that may have wanted something more are the cosplayers and the LARPers, and let's be honest, they'll love any franchise if it gives them an excuse to make a new costume. The Hobbit movies proved to us that an adaptation of the world of Middle-earth was not always gonna be good, and that even the greatest directors in film studio had the ability to discharge absolute garbage. That and a combination of legacy franchises being constantly disrespected and sacrificed on the altar of woke ideologies by untalented hacks and greedy studios sent a clear message that a faithful and good adaptation of Tolkien's work that didn't have politics and biased messages crammed down its gullet was completely impossible. The time for good adaptations was 20 years ago and has never again been ignited. We saw through the wool coverings, bro. It's clear that if another rendition of Tolkien's work was gonna come to the big screen, then it would be for no reason than to make money and be popular, rather than to tell an amazing story written by an amazing man. So no, idiots, it's not better than nothing. It's actually worse than nothing. I would have rather never seen Galadriel and Elrond on the big screen again than to have these demented, degenerate, flaccid copies mucking about as the next and the best. Just leave them to their sanctity, please. Better than nothing. That'd be like going up to a starving homeless man, asking if he was hungry, and then promptly shitting into your hand and offering it to him as a meal. Beggars can't be choosers, hobo. Shit is better than nothing. And then force-feeding your feces down his throat. Except in this case, we're not hobos, and we're not starving. We just want you to leave us and everything we love alone. Please. Ugh, this is taking too long. My brain can only take so much unbridled hogwash. Stay tuned for part 2, because we are only halfway there.